Chapter 7, Section 2, The Roman Empire. This section might have been called The Glory of Rome. What do you think that means? What makes a country glorious? Questions to explore as we go through the video. How did the Romans establish sound government to rule their empire? Second, what advances did the Romans make in the fields of architecture, technology, and science? Key terms to keep in mind that have been defined for you through the Google Classroom: province and aqueduct. Key people and places: Augustus, Hadrian, Greece, and Colosseum. Please make sure to have the Google Doc open as you proceed through the video and to find the answers to the questions that are there. When you have completed, make sure to submit through the Google Classroom. Then the captured weapons passed. There were bronze helmets, shields, and glittering steel swords piled on wagons. Then followed 3,000 men carrying 750 trays heaped with silver coins. Next came the king's small children, now slaves, and the king himself in a dark robe. Some in the crowd wept for the children, but not for the king. Suddenly our great consul himself in a golden chariot. The crowd broke into a roar. It was he who brought all this wealth and glory to Rome. Rome's armies brought much wealth and glory to Rome in the years after Augustus came to power. When these armies returned to Rome, they were greeted with a magnificent parade known as a triumph. Ruling an empire. When Augustus came to power after Caesar's death, Roman control had already spread far beyond Italy. Under Augustus and the emperors who followed, Rome gained an even greater empire. Look at the map on the screen. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain all the way to Mesopotamia. Rome controlled the lands around the Mediterranean. This gave the Romans great pride. In fact, they called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, meaning our sea. Augustus, the Senate, and the people. Augustus was an intelligent ruler. When he was struggling for power, he often ignored the Senate and its laws. But after he won control, he changed his manner. He showed great respect for the Senate and was careful to avoid acting like a king. He did not want to have the same fate as Julius Caesar. Augustus often said he wanted to share power with the Senate. He even said he wanted to restore the Republic. What really happened, however, was quite different. The Senate and the people were so grateful for Rome's peace and prosperity that they gave Augustus as much power as he wanted. Governing conquered peoples. The Romans treated conquered peoples wisely. The Romans took some slaves after a conquest, but most of the conquered people remained free. To govern, they divided their empire into areas called provinces. Each province had a Roman governor supported by an army. Often, the Romans built a city in a new province to serve as its capital. Generally, the Romans did not force their way of life on conquered peoples. They allowed these people to follow their own religions. Local rulers were allowed to run the daily affairs of government. As long as there was peace, Roman governors did not interfere in conquered people's lives. Rather, they kept watch over them. Rome wanted peaceful provinces that would supply it with the raw materials it needed. It also wanted the conquered people to buy Roman goods and to pay taxes. Many of the conquered people adopted Roman ways. Many learned to speak Latin, the language of the Romans, and to worship Roman gods. The 5 good emperors. Augustus died in AD 14. For 82 years after his death, Roman history was a story of good, bad, and terrible emperors. 2 of the worst were Caligula and Nero. They both may have been insane. Caligula proclaimed himself a god and appointed his favorite horse as consul. Nero murdered his half-brother, his mother, and his wife. In AD 96, Rome entered what is called the age of the 5 good emperors. Only the last of these emperors had a son. Each of the others adopted the best young man he could find to be the next emperor. Perhaps the greatest was the Emperor Hadrian. He worked hard to build a good government. His laws protected women, children, and slaves. He issued a code of laws so that all laws were the same throughout the empire. Hadrian reorganized the army so that soldiers were allowed to defend their home provinces. This gave them a greater sense of responsibility. Hadrian also encouraged learning. The Greek influence on Rome. The Romans had long admired Greek achievements. People said that Hadrian spoke Greek better than he spoke Latin. The last of the good emperors, Marcus Aurelius, wrote a famous book of philosophy in Greek. Many Romans visited Greece to study Greek art, architecture, and ideas about government. There was a major difference between Greek and Roman views on learning. The Greeks were interested in ideas. They sought to learn truths about the world through reason. They developed studies such as mathematics, philosophy, and astronomy, which is the study of the stars and planets. The Romans were more interested in using these studies to build things. Under the Romans, architecture and engineering blossomed. With these skills, they built their empire. Architecture and technology. Early Roman art and architecture copied the Etruscans. Later, the Romans studied and copied Greek sculptures and architecture. However, Roman statues and buildings were heavier and stronger in style than those of the Greeks. Using arches, Romans were able to build larger structures. They could create large open spaces inside buildings with wide arched ceilings supported by heavy walls. Most large buildings were built of bricks covered with thin slabs of white marble. However, one important development was a new building material, concrete. Concrete was a mix of stone, sand, cement, and water that dried as hard as a rock. Concrete helped the Romans put up buildings that were far taller than any built before. The greatest Roman building was the Colosseum, a giant arena that held 50,000 spectators. Its walls were so well built that the floor of the arena could be flooded for mock naval battles using real people in real boats. Stairways and ramps ran throughout the building. There were even elevators to carry wild animals from dens below the floor to the arena. Roman engineers built roads from Rome to every part of the empire. This road system covered a distance equal to twice the distance around the Earth at the equator. Do you know the saying, "All roads lead to Rome"? In Roman times, it was true. No matter what road travelers started out on, they would eventually arrive in Rome. A Roman road. Roman roads were built to allow the speedy movement of troops and communication around the empire. The first road built was the Appian Way. Begun in 312 BC, it connected Rome with southern Italy. Roman roads were built as straight as possible and sometimes included tunnels. These roads were rugged and strong. Some even have survived to today. This picture here shows a typical Roman road. There were milestones placed along Roman roads. Each was marked with a number of miles to Rome. A Roman mile was 1,000 paces. Each pace was 2 steps long, about 5 feet. After surveyors laid out the road, workers dug parallel ditches. These ditches were lined with a row of curbstones. Workers dug a deep ditch between the 2 rows of curbstones. They added a layer of broken flat stones 10 to 24 inches deep. The next layer, about 9 inches thick, was made up of smaller stones mixed with lime mortar. Then came a layer of gravel, sand, and mortar about 1 foot thick. The road was paved with tightly fitted flat stones. The surface was higher in the center to allow rainwater to run off into the side ditches. Romans were famous for their aqueducts, structures that carried water over long distances. The aqueducts were huge lines of arches, often many miles long. A channel along the top carried water from the countryside to the cities. Roman aqueducts tunneled through mountains and spanned valleys. Some are still being used today. Roman law. Roman law followed Roman roads throughout the empire. The great Roman senator, Cicero, expressed Roman feeling about law. What sort of thing is the law? It is the kind that cannot be bent by influence or broken by power or spoiled by money. Later, a ruler named Justinian used Roman law to create a famous code of justice. Here are a few laws from that code. No one suffers a penalty for what he thinks. No one may be forcibly removed from his own house. The burden of proof is upon the person who accuses. In inflicting penalties, the age and inexperience of the guilty party must be taken into account. Roman law continued to be passed down through other cultures, including our own. Think of our Bill of Rights. Do any of Justinian's laws appear there? Other Roman ideas of justice are also basic to our system of laws. For example, persons accused of crimes had the right to face their accusers. If there was doubt about a person's guilt, he or she would be judged innocent. This is the end of Chapter 7, Section 2. At this point, there are a few questions you should be able to answer. First, why did the Romans give Augustus so much power? Second, why is Roman law important to us today? Finally, the good emperor Marcus Aurelius chose his son Commodus to follow him. Commodus was one of the worst emperors in Roman history. Why do you think a good emperor might make such a bad choice? At this point, you should not only be able to answer those questions, when you've come to your conclusions, you should make sure your Google Doc has been completed through the Google Classroom and make sure to submit. When you have done so, we will see you in class tomorrow.